or start the recording. Good evening, everyone. Let's see, we're at Wednesday, December 15th already, which is completely insane. Years going by so quickly, but we've made so much progress already. It's amazing. We do have one member of the public in attendance, and we're beginning our meeting today with public open time, which is an opportunity for public members that are joining tonight. We have a couple of them. If you would like to speak about something that's not currently on the agenda and plan for discussion this evening, now would be an opportunity to raise your hand, and we'll provide you with a few minutes to do that.
For the members of public, just so you're aware of how this works over Zoom, if you're not familiar, you can raise your hand, which you'll be able to see probably at the bottom. Also, if you're on a phone, *9 you can press, and that will indicate if you want to raise your hand during the meeting. So with that, I don't see any raised hands, so I think we can move on to the next agenda item.
Great, thank you. Thanks for providing that reminder, Danielle. Okay, so next up on the agenda is approval of the action minutes. And unless anyone has comments on what was already provided for review, I will take any motions to approve the action minutes as they are.
Make the motion.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Great. Thanks, everyone. Okay, and then next up is committee and staff announcements. And this is any announcements not for discussion, but open to anyone on the committee or staff that has an announcement that's not on the agenda.
I'll just mention that we had a mayor and council member meeting regionally on climate a couple of weeks ago, and the head of a company called Extra Food came and presented. It's a really pretty exciting company. I urge you to kind of take a look at it. They are Marin-based. They basically go around and collect food from various organizations and distribute it to people in need, right? So it's got two benefits. One, it's helping out people who actually need food. Secondly, it's significantly reducing landfill, which is getting filled with, decomposing food. And of course, decomposing food is a source of methane gas, which is, multiple times higher concentration level than other types of gases that creep into the atmosphere. And I won't go into any details, but it's a really great initiative. If this is something that's interesting to you, go check them out. And if you need an introduction, just let me know.
Thanks, Irvin. Thanks for that. Anyone else on the committee? I know, Danielle, you have an item about meeting dates. Okay, no other committee members. Danielle, do you want to mention the scheduling conflicts for the next meeting dates?
Sure. And let me just start with, for the record, since this is being recorded, all members of the task force are in attendance for voting purposes tonight, and as part of taking action on the minutes. And then, yes, for the next two meetings, I believe we need to reschedule because of conflicts. There's a bicycle and pedestrian committee meeting in January, and ironically, our topic for the night is transportation. So it would be great to reschedule that. So if members of that committee also want to attend the Climate Action Plan Task Force, they can. And then we have a housing workshop in February. I'm going to try to keep the meetings to the same week, but I will follow up by email on potential dates and then get that out to the community once we establish those dates. If anyone has any feedback on that, let me know.
That
I
was
will
helpful
also
for me.
Okay, I'd also say, I know we did talk about trying to meet in person. And again, I just think with the mask mandate coming back, I do want us to get together. It would be nice to be in person, and that is on my mind, and I am thinking about that. But at least for the next meeting, I'd like to keep it virtual again.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Is there another comment from the committee? Okay.
I'll just say that Danielle and Greg, we've got a housing element meeting the day before the 17th in February, and that's a big meeting. So that's already kind of a pretty exciting week. So we might think about just kind of slipping that to the following week. I think this is going to be, Danielle, you'll probably be super busy, and Greg and I need to be, on our best behavior and smart. So maybe that's not a good week to be having this. Louise, nothing else.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay. And so the BPAC is the January. Well, I will go to that one anyway. I was going to call Andrew and ask him when the next meeting was. Now I know. Okay. If no other announcements, we're going to move on to what is going to be a majority of the session tonight. And that is a continuation of the discussion we started in our last meeting around energy and the subcommittee work that was done to support that, that large item, kind of our biggest item. So the plan for tonight is Danielle's going to be sharing screen, and she was incredibly gracious to put together a decision-making matrix. And that provided an opportunity for us to spend time in between meetings to take a look at all the components around the recommendations, provide comments from the subcommittee, as well as comments from staff, and then a recommendation for how we'll have that discussion in the meeting tonight. So we're going to go through that, make sure that everyone has the opportunity to ask questions. Hopefully you've already had a chance to review that document in preparation for tonight. But essentially, we're going to be moving towards getting a sign off or an approval from this group to say everyone is in agreement on the approach in terms of how we're building this information and these recommendations into our CAP. So we won't be going through every single item. There's quite a bit of information in there, and we want to make sure we have time for discussion, for questions, for any public comment, if there is any. And we should have plenty of time, but we're going to review it and discuss it on an exception basis. And when I say that, I mean, there are a number of items on here that we collectively, as in the subcommittee and staff, agreed that they were items that we could accept as. So those are items that we don't plan to review or discuss this evening, unless anyone in the task force that has not been as active in between meetings on this topic, unless any of you have comments or suggestions or questions with respect to those specific items that we're asking to accept as is. So might be helpful to have a look at the document, and then Danielle as well, if you have any additional color you want to add to that before we dive in. So Danielle and I will be modifying the discussion. We will be taking task force questions up front. And then we're going to be also taking public comment. And then we'll move into the kind of directionally where we want to get to acceptance for each of the items.
Great. So Debbie, yeah, if I can just add a little, like you mentioned, color. So we heard from the subcommittee last time. We also heard from two great speakers on the built environment, and that video is posted to our website, as is the subcommittee's recommendation. There's a lot of technical details related to the climate action plan. So that's why the subcommittees for transportation and the built environment were formed, in order to provide an opportunity for a deeper dive into the information based on also the expertise of the task force. So tonight we're going to review this matrix, take questions from the task force. Then we're going to open it up to public comment to allow the task force to listen to the public comments prior to making decisions. So decisions and directions should not be given until after receiving public comment. With that, I just wanted to share this concept. I think there's been some interest in wanting to talk about the implementation, which totally makes sense when you're talking about policies and programs. You want to understand how things can be implemented. I just want to remind the task force that we're here, and the task force has been created as a first step of policymaking. So the city has a climate action plan that was developed as part of the general plan adoption. We're looking at reevaluating the programs based on our first meeting. We talked about new state goals. The horizon year has changed. It's no longer 2040, and greenhouse gas targets have changed too. So the goals have changed a bit. Our community values are the same. The goals have changed a bit in terms of where we are in the targets that we're interested in. And so with that, the policies and programs is the stage that we're in and we're talking about. So these actions will be presented to City Council, and that provides the opportunity not only for City Council, but also for the community to understand and digest the actions and determine if these actions are embraced by the entire community and by the decision makers. Based on that input from the City Council, the actual document will be put together. We'll quantify the amount of emissions that can happen with the actions. And then the task force will have an opportunity to review the climate action plan, which will then again be presented for adoption by the Community Planning Commission and City Council. Once that is done, the next step is basically implementation. That includes looking at our budget resources, our work plans, and how to go about implementing those programs and policies that have been accepted by the community and by City Council. So that's the basic overall process. So with that, I will now just share the matrix. Can you see the matrix? Does that work?
No,
Not
Grace.
yet. It's a blue screen.
Okay, hold on. So let me just
I have it if needed.
I have this all.
Danielle, are you still there? Some of these people have frozen on me. Does anybody hear me? Uh-oh.
I can hear you, Christine.
You can hear me. Everybody else is frozen. Okay.
That's weird. Warren Wells can hear us.
We had a slight flicker of our power.
I did too.
Although my power didn't go out, but I think my PC, but I believe Danielle's PC was compromised, with a bit of a flicker of the power in our city hall. So stand by, I'll see what's going on, and maybe she can use my computer perhaps to finish the presentation, but just stand by. I don't see any, there's only three on the Zoom call, looks like.
Just us. Yeah, it looks like everybody else got kicked off.
Yeah,
That's
so
weird.
there's probably, I guess, a power outage in the region, so it's only us three.
Uh-oh. Okay, here we go. Susan's coming back.
All right.
Yeah, my lights just kind of dimmed, but
I guess it
I
all
didn't
happened.
lose everybody. There we are. Did you guys lose power in Mill Valley? Is that what happened?
It just went down and up. Yeah.
Mine just went kind of like lowered and then came back up. So I didn't lose it entirely, but that's weird because I'm in Novato. So it's like a complete regional something happened.
That's, yeah. Big.
Yeah.
I have no comment.
And here we are. Mexico has a better electrical grid than we do, apparently.
Wi-Fi, right? Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi.
Is that where you are, Karen?
It is. My first week away in 2 years.
Enjoy. Yeah, I just got a present for my daughter that came from India, and then I got something for my mom that came from London, and they came really fast, and then I sent something to Ohio, and it's stuck in Indiana like for weeks.
Wow.
So,
Your daughter's in India?
no, it was a present for her from there. So I'm just saying, like, things are shipping internationally very
Oh,
fast.
okay.
Trying to do
Okay.
across the country, it's not happening. Yeah.
Supply chain.
No, it's not
Okay.
supply chain, it's just shipping. I have the thing.
So we must have had some sort of power glitch because a few people fell off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my power just went out for a sec.
Never a dull moment. So we have 4 attendees. I think we had about 7 before.
Are you able to share
Debbie's
the
back.
matrix? If you don't, I can share it, Danielle, if you, because I have it handy. If you don't,
I have it here.
Okay, perfect.
You should be able to see it, but I just want to make sure everyone's.
Yeah.
So Danielle, I have a question just of clarification because what I heard Debbie and you saying is a little different than what I was expecting. So we're going to go through just identifying the tasks that have we flagged for discussion with the task force. And we're just going to take questions on them at this point, and then we'll go back. Then we'll listen to the public, and then we'll go back, and then we'll actually get direction on each one. It sounds sort of like we're going to go through it twice. Is that the intention?
No, the intent, so I don't think we're going to go roll through these. I think we're just going to ask for questions.
First, okay.
Everyone has questions. We won't go one by one. Where I'm just going to ask for global questions.
All right, gotcha.
Then we'll have, because I think it's nice to have the community have an opportunity before any decision making's done. And then we can also frame the conversation and will allow some of the subcommittee to maybe talk you'll present it.
Yeah, I'd like to do that. 'Cause-
Subcommittee can, they can take the lead in the conversation
Yeah,
if they'd like to, and then the remainder of the task force can talk about it, and then if we need to do a raise of hands in favor and all that good stuff.
Okay, gotcha.
we got only 10 minutes really last time, and our time is conspiring against us again here. So I do hope that the 3 of us on the subcommittee discussed being able to share kind of our updated view on some of the things that we know we want to get through from a discussion perspective.
Okay, and we can elaborate on why, the comments from staff and
Sure.
why we made that comment, if that's helpful.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Debbie. I wanted to just see if anyone else got kicked out. I think Al
We all
did as
did.
well. Our
We
power
all
just,
did. Most of us did.
oh, everyone did. Okay, I wasn't
Yeah.
sure.
The power went out, so
Yeah,
I
just
got
kicked
cut off too.
out. I got kicked out and just got put back in again.
So we're back.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, welcome back, everyone.
Yeah.
So in terms of, so now you understand the decision-making process and how this is working. Tonight, again, here's the different ways we'll be looking at this. These are the possible actions. These are for the notes that I'll modify as we talk. The subcommittee is based on the subcommittee discussion, and then the staff and consultant recommendation. So with that, I think we're taking questions from the committee, and then we'll turn it over for public comment.
Would it make sense to maybe have a little preamble from, are we going to just go kind of starting to go through into the first section? I guess I had thought that we would be after talking to you, Debbie, earlier today, that subcommittee would kind of take us through this and pause for questions. So we have the public, and again, I'd like the public to have the opportunity to ask questions, as well as the committee to ask questions before there's a dialogue with the whole task force. So the idea is to ask questions of just clarifications that might be needed, and then we will go one by one. Christine will open each of the items. Okay.
Then the task force can elaborate.
Maybe just like a recommendation, like if I can make a recommendation, maybe just have anybody on the committee provide overall questions as opposed to individual questions on each page, just kind of any overall questions. And then we can have the public, and then we can go through page by page. People can ask clarifying questions as well as make comments. Maybe that would be helpful.
So with that, if people could raise their hands if there's any clarifying question.
I'm not seeing any raised hands, but I actually do. I do have a question. Can we get a larger view of the matrix? Maybe reduce it or do presentation or something like that.
Does that work?
That's a little better. Okay, so just for example, on this first one here, so there's subcommittee notes, there's staff consultant recommendation. Subcommittee is saying modify to include this content as proposed there. And then the staff recommendation is discuss that particular modification overall with the task force. Is that what that means?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure I was following that accurately. I had gone through this today and thought that was right, but making sure. Okay, so any questions from the task force on the document, on the process, on the recommendations that the subcommittee has made, or on any items that we're saying except as is? And if no one has questions, we can open it for public comment to question.
Yeah, so I'm going to stop share so I can see the attendees. And if any of you would like to raise your hands. Any members of the public, if you'd like to raise your hand to provide comments on the decision-making matrix that the task force will talk about. Okay, I'm not seeing any raised hands.
I'm not either. Just one last call out to the public. Anyone has any questions or comments about the matrix? Okay. Okay, so given that, we can move into going through the items. And were you saying you are proposing that Christine help walk us through
Yes.
the
I
items?
think
And okay,
Yeah, I think it might be helpful to have her provide, just the overall global perspective, and then we can have the subcommittee go, and then we can move on and have the task force make some recommendations.
okay, great.
All right, then I'll get started. So the first one here on renewable energy generation and storage. So just so everybody's clear, the text here that's not underlined, or when we don't have underline or strikeout, this is coming from the Larkspur cap. So the question that staff had, or the recommendation, was for the staff, for the task force to discuss this item F, which was a new addition. And from basically from my perspective, I'm curious to do a study on opportunities and specific action steps for expansion of rooftop solar and battery storage can be kind of a costly thing for staff to undertake, or to identify and engage in a consultant to do that study. Considering the pace of solar installation and how much it has expanded, as you saw in the background information that was provided for this topic, the solar installation more than tripled in 2019 and 2020 over 2019 levels. It's on track to even surpass that for 2021. And then battery storage also has been installed. It was installed in 72% of the projects in 2020. And so far it's at 68% of the PV projects are installing battery storage in 2021. So that's actually a really good and kind of surprising finding. And so I'm kind of curious. I know typically what I would do is just assume the same pace of solar installation in order to make to quantify the greenhouse gas reductions. And I think it will be significant, just assuming the same pace. So I think, just kind of given that, I'm curious about, I think this is kind of a matter of, is this something that you want to invest money and staff time in doing, considering the track record that we have for the past couple of years? So I think what we'd like to do now is kind of hear from the subcommittee on kind of their take on this, and have the entire committee come up with, give us some direction on whether or not to include that. I think the rest of it, we're all kind of agreed on that should be included. All right, Debbie, do you want to call on the individual members who raise their hands and to speak, or do you want me to do that?
I can help with doing that for sure. And I was going to look to Susan to take the lead here, given she's the chair of the subcommittee, to weigh in, Susan, on this item here.
Thank you.
Al is raising his hand, so
Yeah,
I think Al wants to speak as well.
I saw that. Thank you. Yeah, so I'll turn it to Al. I guess first I have a comment, but first I want to ask a question. Do we have any data on I know we have you cited the relative rate of adoption, which is definitely escalating, but do we have any data on the absolute penetration adoption of solar within our building portfolio as a percentage?
That's a good question. I can definitely quantify that by making some assumptions about how much electricity is being generated by the distributed solar that's already installed, and then
Yeah.
what percentage that is, and then
Yeah.
kind of quantifying how much will, assuming that same rate, what
Yeah.
percentage that will represent in 2030. And I can make
Okay.
those calculations, yes.
And then potentially cross-referencing that with MCE, knowing. So I think the point here is based on the US numbers, we're still in a single-digit penetration of solar, generally speaking, for the country. So I would assume it's still low, increasing fast, but still quite low. So our desire in having this study would be to just accelerate it much, much faster so that we get to a majority share, if not MCE. And part of the reason is to enable the cost effectiveness of electrification, which we'll get into later. It also increases resiliency. There's just a lot of co-benefits to it. So I would like to maintain our recommendation for this. When all is said and done, we can look and see if we need to, reprioritize based on budget. But at this point in the discussion, I would like to keep it on the table, and I'll turn it to Al, unless there's any questions for me.
So I guess I have 3 comments to make. The first is that I think assuming a continuation of historical rates of solar installation could be not a great assumption, since rooftop solar is threatened by changes in the net metering approach, and we're hearing that a change is imminent that's going to make the installation of rooftop solar much less attractive by eliminating the preferential generation rates for generating power and selling it back to the utility. So that's imminent. So the landscape's going to change pretty meaningfully, and that would be a good time to kind of see what impact that's going to have, and then evaluate whether there are policies that we can undertake at the city level to address that. The second point is batteries are a critical part of the overall building electrification picture. Oftentimes resistance to electrification, especially in recent years, has been tied to resilience for power outages. There's a tendency to say we need to have natural gas in order to weather the occasional outage. By accelerating battery adoption as part of a solar installation, or as just part of a resilience strategy for households, is a critical transitional tool to help residents deal with the occasional power outage like the one we had today. And then the final point I'd make is that I think we're trying to have a broader conversation about how to help the city build capacity for taking action on some of these measures and ideas. Some of the ideas are not shovel ready because it's a very dynamic situation. And a study is really only one mechanism, and it's one that happens to rely on city funding and staff time. And frankly, that would probably be our last 2 choices for how to move something like this forward. So we're really looking for other alternatives like community groups to develop the plans around this. So I think a study was really what was offered in response to our initial suggestion that we needed to build some capacity to continue working on this and have a pipeline of information back to the city.
Any other comments from subcommittee members on this particular item?
I mean, I think Al spoke really well on that. I think, the goal here is to not just meet certain numbers. I think the goal here is to really achieve a level maybe beyond what seems to be the norm and how could we do better? And it doesn't, if a study allows us, and like Al said, it doesn't have to be staff time, but it could go on the work plan to kind of manage community event or something. I don't think there's any harm in having it there, I guess. And the point is that, you know, when the power goes out around here and I'm on a hike in the evening or whatever, and I hear all those gas powered generators go on, is, you know, Al spoke well to that, is that needs to be battery backup, not gas powered generators. And, you know, the bigger homes have those. And I think the future is to get rid of those as we go all electric. And I just don't see any harm in having this on there. I think we, you know, at some point, climate action might be so important that the city might need to staff up in order to do that. And if we base decisions on here based on current funding for city staff, you know, how are we going to achieve lofty goals to actually make a difference here and be a model community, not only for Marin, but for the whole state and potentially the country.
I see
Urban.
Urban. Yeah.
Yeah, great. So certainly agree with the comments that I've heard. So I think what we're considering here is, you know, is doing the study at some point, and that makes sense. It would make sense to probably do this on a county basis, right? I mean, the PSPS that affects us affects 12 other or 11 other jurisdictions in Marin County, and everyone's got this issue. And it's something that maybe Drawdown would want to lead, or maybe, you know, the county together with us would want to lead, since it affects all of us. So I think leaving it on the work plan makes sense. Probably the, you know, maybe modify the text just to kind of indicate the fact that this would not be just a Mill Valley specific issue. This would be a sort of a countywide issue that we would address through maybe through the organizations. And just a reminder that Drawdown is transforming into a nonprofit, right, that will raise money precisely for figuring out how we reduce greenhouse gas, you know, emissions. And that might be a good way to kind of knock this one out, and also kind of provide an answer for 11 other jurisdictions in the county.
Fiona.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate about that I think it's important to exceed, you know, the bare minimum of our goals, and I don't see any harm in keeping it on there. I think it's a really good goal to have, and I don't see any harm in it.
Thank you. I'll add a comment as well. And then Al, did you have another one, or was that from your hand from before? So I agree with the point that it doesn't harm, there's no harm in keeping it on, but I also like what you were saying, Urban. I think that perhaps a modification of this text would be more suitable to ensure that we're leveraging all of the resources that are available to us, because you're right, we're not the only ones that need to be looking at this. And, you know, from a county standpoint or other organizations, I think that there's some partnerships we can leverage. So, you know, perhaps a modification. And Danielle, I don't know if you have a suggestion on how we might want to update the language. I don't think you're doing this in real time, but
I think we can probably go through, just sort of take notes, and then, you know, kind of figure out the language later on, probably. And I'm taking notes on the document myself, so happy to work with somebody on that if necessary.
Yeah, and I thought Danielle was going to be taking notes, and is she, Danielle, are you? Just not sure if we've lost her.
Yeah.
I'm here. I'm
Oh,
just having
okay.
a problem finding my unmute button because I'm sharing a screen.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I think we can note what's being said and the idea of collaboration in working on a study. So that's duly noted. I don't think we need to have the subcommittee go back. I think we should try to just work on having language, and then we can bring it back as part of the work. So I think it could be just adding collaboration or something to that point.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, then I think we can move on to the next one, which is REC3. And actually, it's the same issue with the RE. It's identified the one after that, which is identified as REXX. And essentially, so both of these say adopt an ordinance, which our recommendation is that we say something like consider adopting an ordinance. And that's simply because these ordinances, there are no jurisdictions that have adopted them yet. And so we don't really have a good case study. I think, and I know that consider sometimes sounds like it doesn't have a lot of force behind it. And so we could say something like, develop a draft ordinance and bring it to the city council for consideration that will require all new construction. So at least we know we're bringing it actually to it's getting to that point where it's been studied, the ordinance has been drafted, and the city council is ready to consider it. I think at this point, we just really don't know, it's going to warrant a lot more work and consideration and study than what we can do at the right now in developing of the climate action plan. So that would be our recommendation. And I think we should hear from the task force.
Urban, I noticed you put your hand up right away. Would you like to
No,
say
no, the task force should go first, sorry. Preemptively raised my hand, just ignore it.
All right. Well, first comment I want to make is this and Al, I know you'll have a lot to say and add, so I know you'll build off this, but we don't see this as like all or nothing immediately done. What we're recommending later in this section is to combine the things that relate to electrification for new, for remodel, for burnout, in existing, et cetera, all in one kind of bundle so that this can be looked at as a phased approach. So that's sort of an overarching recommendation to this section that we thought of after we'd already submitted this and this was already put into the matrix. And we just think that would make it a little easier to see how one thing builds off the next. I do want to note that there are lots of jurisdictions that are really, really actively moving forward. We got, for example, from Sausalito, a draft ordinance that they requested we not share with you, but basically has language that reflects quite a lot of this. I just saw breaking news a couple hours before our meeting. New York City just passed a ban on new gas hookups for new construction. There's other examples that I'm sure Al will speak to. This is, and I guess I would just say, this is not a time for us to wait and see. This is not the stance that I would like to see this task force take. I think if anything, the task force, what our responsibility is to really point the way towards what lies ahead and what needs to be done, not just what we think others follow and wait and see what others do in this. It's too important. Every single time every single time a new gas furnace or a new gas water heater goes in, that's locking in emissions for decades. So we have to get in front of that quickly. And there's just tons of support, at all levels of jurisdictions available to our constituents to help with this. And you've got some very, very motivated people on the task force, including myself, and I know Al and others and Greg, to help figure this out. So there's support all around us. I attended fossil-free Silicon Valley, fossil-free building Silicon Valley. They're working hard on this. I spoke with the San Francisco DOE person. They just put out their climate action. They're working hard on this. The Bay Area is really rising to this. I don't think we should punt on this. And frankly, I do think adopt is the right language because we need to do it. We need to.
Susan, I'm sorry. I misspoke. So I just wanted to kind of jump in.
Okay.
For REC3,
yeah.
The replacing the natural gas appliances, or actually, banning natural gas for new construction. That is not the one that I was recommending consider language for. That, I was actually talking about the burnout, and I had jumped ahead when I was, so I'm sorry about that. For the new construction and new remodels, I totally agree with you. There are lots of examples in lots of cities that are already on that path. I think the issue here for this specific one is that the change here is to adopt the ordinance upon adoption of the climate action plan. And so from our perspective, it would make more sense. It's a little bit of putting the cart before the horse, because you want to, go through and do the climate action plan and then actually do the implementation of it. Also, because of the timing with the building cycle, it would make more sense to do it at the end of the year and have it go into effect on January 1st with the new building code. It doesn't mean that it couldn't be developed and drafted and adopted with implementation to occur starting on January 1st with the new building code. So I'm sorry, I misspoke on that one.
I'm glad you jumped in, because actually, now you said it, I'm like, I thought we were aligned, because
yes, absolutely.
For the task force benefit, I think we are. So on this section, which refers to new construction, major remodels, what you have in front of you, we're aligned. So
okay, so we'll just take out the idea of adopting it upon the date of the climate action plan adoption. It will occur with the new building cycle. I think everybody.
Ally,
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Do you mind if I make a comment?
Okay.
So I agree with the recommendation that's in the far right column. I also want to just point out that, remind everybody that Mill Valley has had a long history of being at the absolute tip of the spear when it comes to the building code, right? So San Anselmo, Mill Valley, the county have all been pushing this issue the hardest of everybody, right? So Mill Valley is absolutely not dragging its feet on this thing. So I think that's just the first thing to recognize. And secondly, and I've said this before, as a matter of practice, sitting in many meetings where we've gone through major remodels and new construction, as a matter of practice, everything is electric when it's being built in Mill Valley. Everything. I mean, you have an applicant come in, they literally do cartwheels trying to make their house net zero, green, solar, green roofs, everything, right? So we're kind of splitting hairs a little bit on this thing. I mean, applicants have been more than willing to do this thing, and we have that written already into our REACH code. So I think we're pretty good here already, and I'm happy to see that we've got language in here that'll keep it at that level going forward as well. But I just want everybody to have that in mind as we go through this. Mill Valley and I think it was Corte Madera were the two cities that made the largest reduction in greenhouse gases over the last cycle in all of Marin County. So we have not been dragging our feet on any of this stuff. That's it.
I think just quickly, I just want to add that the motivation for us to put that date in there helps me on the planning commission when I can have a condition of approval when somebody isn't considering in a major remodel, they're just going to put in a gas furnace because it's cheaper. And so our thought here is to just, move this on as quickly as we can so that I have some leverage, because when I'm deliberating and when we're talking about, in the process of not just design review, but also in study sessions, is to be able to talk about our climate action plan includes, these things. And like you said, most people have not objected to it, but I can't say that everybody is doing that. It just depends on who the applicant is, but that was our kind of motivation to come up with a date. And if it needs to adjust a little bit, fine. But an entire year of not being able to use that and leverage as a condition of approval makes it a little bit harder for me on the planning commission.
Can I provide some, I know I'm not a task force, but if I could just provide some perspective that I think it's important to acknowledge is we do have the California Energy Commission that is supposed to be a part of the conversation and of the approval of the things like this in order to make sure there's not a cost burden. So while it's important and laudable to want to add conditions of approval related to this, it really should go through the right process of the building standards in order to make sure that we are not burdening the community, and we're following the rules related to the building code and how to adopt new regulations above and beyond the building code.
Can I ask a point of clarification on that, Danielle? So we've seen a number of jurisdictions that have moved in the direction of all electric for new construction, and they've used kind of a belts and suspenders approach where they have adopted an all electric reach code, which I think has the condition that you mentioned, and they've also simultaneously adopted a ban on the installation of new natural gas infrastructure. Do you happen to know if the latter requires a similar study? And I guess before you answer that, I just wanted to make a quick point to build upon what Urban was saying and just state that on average, residents will save thousands of dollars by avoiding the inclusion of two sources of energy, electricity and fossil fuels in the construction, and that cost savings can be deployed for batteries to increase resilience. So unlike some of the other electrification initiatives that we'll get to later on, this really doesn't raise the types of equity considerations that are possible with existing buildings.
I guess I don't understand, because this is for new construction and major remodels, this item. So I think we're talking about major remodels and new construction. So that is related to the REACH code. In terms of infrastructure, are you talking about public infrastructure?
No, when I'm talking about the approaches that jurisdictions have taken to this type of ordinance, they have, in essence, done a REACH code that's all electric, and then they've passed a separate ordinance that's a gas ban under the health and safety powers, if I'm saying that correctly. Christine, do you? I think you know what I'm referring to. Do you want to elaborate on that?
I do, and I think potentially banning gas connections does not require the same study because you're not modifying the building code. But I'm not sure. I think that would be something that should be vetted with the city attorney. It is, sometimes other jurisdictions do things that aren't necessarily, proper, shall I say. So just because it's been done, I think you would want to get advice from the attorney about whether that can be done or not without the cost effectiveness study that is required by the CEC for amending the building code or changing the energy requirements.
Anyway, good point about the fact that it's cost effective to just kind of go ahead and do this. I think that's pretty much where most people shake out when they go and do new construction. And then just kind of another reminder, we do like roughly 20 new homes a year in Mill Valley. That's kind of, where we end up. So this is not going to move the needle significantly in terms of greenhouse gas reduction. I mean, it's certainly very, very important to do. We have been doing this thing all along. So I think we're kind of in a good spot on this thing.
I would say one other point to make here is that because it does say that, to work with the county on development of the ordinance, the county's timeline is to take the rest of this year to develop that ordinance. So if you were going to adopt the ordinance right away, you would not be actually working with the county on development of an ordinance. And there are benefits to trying to do an ordinance that is consistent across the county as much as possible.
So I think we are aligning on this across the board.
Okay.
timing.
All right, then let's move on to the next one, which is RE.
I don't, you guys, I guess you're not seeing my hand up.
Oh, sorry, I didn't
Oh,
see
sorry,
it.
Susan.
Moderators.
Yes.
Waving at you.
Gotta flip through them all.
I
Okay.
just want to note the modification we had regarding permit streamlining as a footnote. That we would get into that as part of the ordinance language and development around implementation and capacity planning. So I'm just acknowledging that that comment was made by the subcommittee, but if no one else has a comment on that, we can just, yeah, go ahead on to the next thing.
Okay. All right, so the next one is the one I was talking about earlier. So I won't repeat what I just said in order to be efficient with our time. But essentially it is about, using this consider versus adopt an ordinance. And this has the same issue about upon adoption of the climate action plan to adopt this. And again, I think the timing should not be identified here. That's something that we should put into the work plan and rather than here in the text of the measures. So comments?
Okay, so your recommendation, Christine, is more along the lines of this is, potentially fine, but from a language standpoint, this would be more suitable for the work plan versus the cap for approval.
Yeah, so I would say my recommendations would be to change adopt an ordinance to something along the lines of draft an ordinance and bring it to the city council for consideration. That phases in requirements. And then for C, where it says upon adoption of the climate action update, I would just say adopt an electrification education requirement. And then for the timing of it, that has to be, put into the staff work plan, and then we can identify the timing in the work plan that goes into as a, as in the back of the plan, there will be a work plan that identifies each action, identifies the lead department, and identifies potential funding sources and puts a time frame around each action. So I would put it there. It would be my recommendation. And
Susan and Al, I see you already.
Al, you go first. I'll follow you on this.
Okay, yeah, I think, Christine, your recommendation of draft an ordinance and bring it to council versus adopt an ordinance, I think for me personally, that works. The main idea here was consider is kind of a watered down word that does not suggest that this is going to be commenced immediately. It doesn't really feel particularly actionable. This is something that the city should be starting now. Sausalito, as Susan mentioned, is going to be discussing an ordinance that has the features that we describe here. In some ways, it's more ambitious. They are already including replacement on burnout and a replacement on sale. So I think we just want to make sure that this is a topic that is discussed now because it's being discussed at the county and it's being discussed in neighboring cities. So I think your formulation works for me. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
I concur with Al. I think, we weren't given the guidance in terms of how to frame timing when we originally set out on this, so that's fine. I do want to make sure that, and I think we're saying the same thing, Christine, but I just want to make sure that we do get some real milestones with dates when we have the final piece, because so that it doesn't kind of end up being a consider type of situation, even though drafting and adoption is intended. So as long as we'll get to a point where we've got dates by when, then I'm okay with this approach.
I mean, when we discussed this as a subcommittee, it was really the word consider had no teeth to it, and we want to make sure that our climate action plan is something that moves important things forward. And if it's not on the top of the list for staff to work on that because there's so many things on the work plan, I I see that, how many things are going on at the city for other issues. So it's just, and it sounds like if Al brought up the concern when we were talking before, and if this satisfies Al, then I'm good with it.
Great. Urban.
So first of all, top down, I think we should always be thinking about what the high leverage items are for our greenhouse gas reduction. And we've talked about this before, right? So obviously transportation and, as a goal, right? Getting each household to adopt one EV per household is a good top down goal. Secondly, that getting households to move over time to electrification of their households is another high priority. I mean, those are the two biggest leverage items we've got, right? So we're on to something which I think is really important. So I certainly agree wholeheartedly with the aim of getting this thing adopted. I just want to point out that it's not a question of sort of writing up the legal language and putting it in front of the city council and saying, please adopt, right? So every ordinance has got a lot of work behind it. So for example, when we look at the inclusionary bonus, how much affordable housing you're going to put into a multi-unit development, that's 25%. That number doesn't just sort of come out of our ambition. That number comes out of a lot of work, a lot of mathematical work and study work, trying to figure out what actually is possible to do, what builders will actually allow allow incentives so that they actually build those buildings. And you can go through every single ordinance. There's a lot of work that goes behind these things, right? These are not low lift items. So doing this thing, in conjunction with Sausalito, San Anselmo, other cities, the county, makes complete sense here, right? Because you just have to figure out how this is going to work, the cost, the benefit, the bottlenecks that are associated with this thing, right? Your applicability, your ability to actually get this thing done, the input of the community that's involved, that's impacted by this, all of that needs to be brought in on this thing. So I just want to make everybody aware of how the sausage actually gets made. And that's how the sausage gets made. So it is going to be something that we are going to need to consider as a matter of course, right? Because we cannot dictate that we are going to adopt this thing. We have to go through the work in figuring out what is possible first, and then we can go ahead and adopt these things. So just to set expectations about how this actually works. But this is absolutely a high leverage item. This is something that should be at the top of the list. It's just a question of how we go about getting this thing done. I'm very encouraged by the fact that other communities are looking at this thing. So that provides us with partnerships that we can work together with on this to make adoption of this much, much easier. Does that make sense, everybody? Great.
So that said, Urban, are you comfortable with the language as it is now, the draft and ordinance for council consideration?
Yeah, again, it's not going to be drafting an ordinance, right? The study needs to be done first, right? So it is something that we need to do. This is an item that we're going to be working towards, but there's a lot of work ahead before you get to the point where you draft the ordinance. So that's where we are, right? There's the study which goes, and then there's the drafting of the ordinance. So that comes later on. And again, we want to be able to leverage our partners around the county that are also interested in it. So it's fantastic news that Sausalito wants to do this. I hope other towns also want to do this. I know that the county is probably interested in this. So we should all be working together to kind of work out all the nitty gritty details, the nuts and bolts, the cost, the benefit, the bottlenecks, all those things before we get to the point where we draft this thing. And then we can draft this thing in conjunction with our partners. That's the way I think this would end up working. And Christine and Danielle, you should definitely feel free to chime in on that. But that's the way I've seen it happen. And that's what I think is probably going to happen here as well.
Right. There's a lot of work to get to this point, but this is really written more from a result standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, like top down, this is a high leverage item, right? We've got 6,500 households in this town. We produce 20 new ones per year, right? So where's the balance of power? It's obviously here. It's not on the other item, right? So this is really, really critical, right? So how we get from where we are today to a future where we are primarily electric, we've got battery storage, right? We're generating our own power. That's critical, right? So, but there's just a lot of work in between here and there. That's my point. But this is absolutely a high leverage item. It's something that we absolutely need to be working towards. I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but.
Oh, no, I think you are. I think absolutely, there's a lot of work that goes into before you actually draft the ordinance. And I think, we can actually spell that out, or we can just make the assumption, and the way it's written here is like, this is what the city is committing to drafting the ordinance for the council consideration. And then whether it is adopted or not, after looking at all of the evidence and studies and arguments for and against, is, what will happen
Yeah.
in the future. So
I mean, the council, when they read through this thing, will be looking for that second part first, right? And then the ordinance second, right? So
right.
we might want to just reflect that, because otherwise that is absolutely going to come up as be like, this is not how things happen. So I'll let you
Okay.
guys figure out how you want to write it, but that's
Okay.
Yep.
Got it. I think Danielle has that. So I think we can move on to the next one unless there's any other comments. Susan, you have your hand up.
Thank you. I think that's where that consolidating these three into one sort of package with some preamble around capacity and implementation planning as being critical to achieve what's being put out here. That might be a way to address what Urban's talking about.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But yeah, ready for the next if you are.
All right. Okay. So we can move on to the next one.
Oh, sorry, I just noticed explore opportunities to collaborate. I didn't hear that language.
I think what Danielle's done is she's taken it was in B, and she's moving it up. She's just kind of rewriting as we're.
But I think that that changes the meaning. So I just kind of want to pause there, because certainly I guess I feel like we had led with draft an ordinance for council consideration, part of which would be include. I don't know that I would. That changes the meaning, I think, in a way that we might not have intended.
Because you're saying that the city should go ahead and if the county doesn't want to do it, or there isn't a countywide process, that the city itself should go ahead and
That's
adopt
still the
and
intention.
draft the ordinance. So yeah, that makes sense. And Al, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Susan said, because I think there's an assumption here that across all jurisdictions that everybody's facing the same dynamic, and it's actually not the case. In Fairfax, they didn't approve all electric for major remodels, but here and in Sausalito, that's going to be a much better fit because much of the construction are remodels. So and the county is going to have its own factors that it's looking to. So I think exploring opportunities to collaborate on the development of it simply means it's a component of what Urban described, which is a due diligence process where staff and council members use all available resources and inputs. But these ordinances are being passed all around us. So I think the idea is that we want to get this into the work plan starting as soon as possible. So I think that was consistent among all of the subcommittee members. So we just want to make sure that as long as the other task force members as a whole agree with that sentiment, that should really be the overriding direction.
I would just say that I'm not aware of any ordinance, any jurisdictions that have passed a burnout ordinance. They certainly are passing ordinances that either ban natural gas hookups or require all electric buildings, but I'm not aware of a burnout ordinance at this point.
The Sausalito one that's under consideration
is a burnout ordinance
that has a burnout and a replace on resale.
But it's not adopted yet, I think.
But it's not adopted yet.
I guess, you guys, for the sake of time, can we,
we should move on.
Yeah, perhaps.
Yeah, okay. All right. Okay, so the next one is, I think the same thing about adopting an ordinance. This would be something like, draft an ordinance for council consideration. And then I would also just take out the by 2030. All of these actions that are in the plan are supposed to be, that's why they're in the plan. It's for 2030 and they're all supposed to be completed by 2030. And again, the timing itself will be identified in the work plan, whether it's a short-term or a medium-term or a long-term project. So those were our comments, and
Al, is that a lingering hand raise?
No, that's a new hand. And I think the idea, and we'll just reiterate it again, because I think it simplifies the recommendation, is that, if you're talking about replace all natural gas appliances and equipment with electric, as this item, and the preceding item is replace on burnout, that's really just a phased in approach of getting to the same place, which is getting all electric in existing buildings. So our subcommittee recommendation was to just consolidate these two, since the language is going to be the same. And basically it's calling for drafting an ordinance that phases in the accomplishment of that.
I see. Okay.
And I think resale did not, I don't know if the word resale got picked up, but I think that's something we should make it explicit into that.
Okay, then I take back my comment. Thanks, Al, for clarifying.
So again, we don't have any other burnout ordinances around us, right? So, we're going to try to push this thing, but, we're not going to be out there on our own trying to get this thing done for a whole host of reasons, not to mention the fact that there will be a lot of opposition to requiring these things, right? As opposed to providing incentives to do these things. They're very, very different. So you need to be really careful when you get into requiring this thing to happen, right? Because then you are foisting a lot of cost onto homeowners, and homeowners, I could tell you, have got a lot to say about when they get costs foisted onto them. They are not happy about it, right? So need to be really careful on this. I think the approach of working together with partners around the county is really important, and to providing alternatives for homeowners, right, that also get towards reduction, right? In other words, it's not just a requirement that you absolutely have to do this. There are other things that you can do as well to kind of help reduce greenhouse gases. This thing needs a lot of studying around it, right? You should really think much more about this, less about the stick, whacking people with an ordinance, and more about the green nudge, right? Providing the incentives for people to do these things, because otherwise you end up in a bloody battle on some of these things, and it's hard. Okay, so, and there's potential for litigation on these things. So it's just something to bear in mind about how you actually get these things implemented. So I think the comments that were made by staff are frankly spot on. I mean, we know that these are important things to do, but there's a real big question about how you go about proceeding this thing forward. And we have to be careful about some of the language in this thing, so it's not too prescriptive about what is going to be happening next. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, I think the goal is to have it be a phased approach, and understanding that you couldn't just do that with a stick, is it's a phased approach. These line items talk about financing and funding and feasibility and whether it's equitable and all that. And so that's not being ignored. That's why that's part of that. But if you don't put something in our general plan related to our climate action plan, then it could just go nowhere until we are back trying to update it again. And how many years is that going to be?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think we agree that these are high priority items. I think that's going to be an important part of this plan, right? Calling out the things which are high priority, so that everyone's really clear what are the things that we really need to be getting done. So I don't think that's going to be a problem. And I don't think that, frankly, in the past, it's been much of an issue to get Mill Valley to be very close to the tip of the spear on a lot of these issues, right? That's been in our history. So I don't think we're going to drag our feet on this thing. It's just a question of making sure that all the questions are answered, right? And that we are going about this in the correct way. It's not being too prescriptive, right? That we are encouraging people to do these things, and we are providing strong incentives for people to do these things, including education and whatever else we can do to get there. But when you make it a mandate, you are getting into a very sticky situation. And I'm just telling you, that's not where you want to be on some of this stuff. And if you are not aware, you should go look and see what happened when there was very prescriptive language surrounding reduction of fuel around homes to reduce fire risk, right? So you just have to be really sensitive when you get into these things, okay? You cannot be that prescriptive and restrictive on them. We can have the goals and we need to be working towards them, but there's just a lot of sausage that needs to be ground up before you get to this point. Just to make that
understood,
crystal clear, right?
Right, but that's why it says phases in requirements, and there could be exemptions based on equity. There could be a lot of things. So
there's just exactly right. So these things need to be crafted, right? And there's just, so we need to be moving towards that, right? Figuring out where all the bottlenecks are, how you go about doing this thing. The best way to craft this thing is going to be where we're headed towards. But the overall sentiment, which I think we should be focused on, is these are the high items, right? The high priority items, and that's I'm hearing that loud and clear, and that's the perspective I had coming into this, that these were the things that we need to get done. So that's all good.
I don't think that the subcommittee and Urban are disagreeing in this regard. I think it's really a question of what's the best way to put a placeholder in the cap so that the high priority nature of these actionable things is pinned for everybody's attention, and so that it makes it into work plans. Ultimately, all of the considerations that Urban identified are listed here, and the commitment to get started is what we're struggling with the language. Draft an ordinance, consider an ordinance, and so there's precedent with lots of other cities, including Larkspur, Fairfax, and others that have recently adopted caps, that this is the way you put a placeholder in a cap that may be out there for 8 years.
Yeah, but we are drafting language, which is different, right? Which is why it's red and underlined, right? So we're clearly taking this thing a little bit step further, right? So
this language, the phased-in approach, does not differ from Fairfax. It differs from Larkspur, which really wasn't ready to dig in. So that's the main reason that the task force went with the Fairfax language, and Sausalito just went right to the ordinance. So.
Yep. Yeah, Fairfax was an outlier, right, in the way that they drafted their caps. So that's just an FYI, right?
So it sounds like for this one in particular that we may be, we may experience some severe pushback, and we don't want to shut this down with an absolute no, but maybe open this up to more like consideration and discussion with the council, that we can use language that is acceptable and adoptable. So for example, maybe we soften this in a way to add in looking at incentives and putting in an incentive program, leveraging working models that we can, follow, that are provable and successful. So
that's what this is trying to do. It's not a hard, you have to do this. It says phases and requirements, and all the things that Urban was concerned about, like Al said, are all listed there in those points below there. So I think it's just a matter of getting it, like we're all talking about. It's an important item. Our quantity of gas consumption is one of the biggest things. So this is just a way to address it, knowing that we have to figure out how to get there. We're not going to tell everybody they have to adopt this tomorrow. This could take, a whole lot of time, and when it's phased in, there's going to be plenty of considerations on being equitable. So I don't think it's like, I was at that meeting about the fire safety, and I know what Urban's thinking about. So that was in complete mayhem. It was like a riot. So
as long as we all understand where we're coming from, then I think that I have great faith in Danielle and Christine's ability to kind of get this language right. I think I do agree that we all agree on where we're trying to head to on this thing. So I think we can move on.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I agree. Susan, you may have another comment, but I think we're all leaning in the same direction here. We just need to get the language right.
Yeah, and I guess, the language is, I guess I'd prefer to keep the draft for now, as per what Greg, I think the three of us on the subcommittee are recommending, that it gives us a stake in the ground, and that if we need to elaborate on A, B, C, and add D and E, that will show that, in the totality, we want this to be a positive thing for people, and that they will be supported. But I just think draft for the way it's worded is it's not that we're implementing, we're putting it out there to begin the process. So I would really like to not back off of that at this point.
I think what we're saying is that we want to make sure that we massage the language in a way that is imminently adoptable and acceptable by city council.
I think we're all saying the same thing, but if you don't have draft, if you don't have draft and ordinance in there and then have all these bullets under it, it's going nowhere.
Yeah.
Good work plan stuff for the planning commission, Greg.
I know. Well, we've got our we're gonna have our retreat come up, so we love things like this. There's gonna be a lot of stuff on there about related to more objective design guidelines that have to do with relationship to climate action plan, to sustainability, et cetera.
Excellent.
That's why it's good to have something in here. If we have something in here that these things are started, then I can reference that when we're going through the process, and it's a lot easier. People actually, I've had architects, ask me, it's like, wow, it'd be really helpful to have a list of the things that you just mentioned, so that when I start the projects, I can start thinking about that right away at the beginning and not have it happen at the end.
Okay, I think we can move on to the next one. And so some of these we flagged just because they were new or they were significantly rewritten, and they may not even warrant, I know we're going to be running out of time, so they may not even warrant discussion. For this one, the only question that we had was this new B, facilitate creation of home ambassador electrification program and promote the program to the community. That seemed, I'm not sure what the task force had in mind, but that seems like something that would probably be best coordinated at the county level or even at the regional level. There is Bayron that provides funding for this sort of program. They've done this work with just energy efficiency, and it does seem like, electrification is the next step. So maybe this should be kind of a countywide or regional program, and we should change the language set as opposed to Mill Valley creating this program on their own. And that was the only comment that I had.
I think that's a fair point. I think it doesn't necessarily to be creation, because like you said, we can leverage leverage programs like that. I think that the intent of that is to say that there's an intention, there's an explicit connection with programs so that they can be brought back to Mill Valley.
Okay, great. So then I think we're on the same page there.
Yeah.
So unless anybody has any comments or questions, I think we can move on to the next one.
Yeah, we're good.
All right.
You're good with that. So am I modifying this at all?
Yeah, we're going to modify that B, facilitate creation, to say something more about, countywide or regional partner or leverage.
On behalf of
So it's B. Yeah, leverage or collaborate or partner with the county or regional effort to create a home ambassador electrification program.
I'll just leave it like that. So
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, countywide, regional. Yeah. Okay, so the next one is the microgrid study. And I don't think we had really any questions on this one. The microgrid study was just more a matter of whether the entire task force agreed with this, since this is a new one. I think there are other, like Fairfax is creating a microgrid in Fairfax, and certainly there may be opportunities to do that in Mill Valley. So does anybody want to discuss this or object or want to modify this one at all? I'm not seeing any hands.
I'm in agreement.
Okay, then I think we can move on to the next one that says discuss. And that's REM1. Actually, we don't really need to discuss that one. The municipal building there we go, that one. Replace all natural gas consumption, combustion, and electrify all city buildings by 2030. This improved energy efficiency of city buildings just belongs in a different one because it's calculated separately. So that's really the only reason I wanted to delete that and put it in a different action. And
I
so,
also think this should, is it related to burnout? Is it just upon improvements?
No, it's to do it.
Right, so I think that might be potentially the conversation piece here. I could understand doing something similar to what we're talking about for the commercial buildings upon burnout, or, phasing in.
Well, the goal here is a lot of these buildings might have prehistoric mechanical systems from, the whatever, 60s, 70s, 80s, and that may not burn out in time to kind of, initiate change. So at what point as a community do we look at wherever we can to improve our, or minimize our impact on the climate? So I think it just is a goal based on, I think we were talking about this in kind of relationship to Ithaca model and some of these other communities that are trying to do something a little bit more progressive to move in the directions and be a role model for the community.
I think the key point here is what Greg mentioned about being a role model for the community. Usually when we're talking about electrifying all buildings by 2030, the main objection is equity. When you're talking about a city that of a wealthy community, we should be able to lead by example, and the next 9 years ought to be ample time for us to evaluate and replace. And I would suspect, based on the data I've seen for similar projects, that many of these projects would actually be profitable for the city in terms of energy savings from the use of heat pumps that tend to be 3 to 4 times as efficient as fossil fuels.
I was going to add, this provides a great case study for the community. It's something that can be discussed, all the steps that go into it, the before, the after. It's just a great learning opportunity. And I think it really is walking our talk. If we're expecting everyone else to come along, we need to show that we can do it as a town.
Urban
Paul?
and
Or go
Paul.
ahead.
Yeah, hi. I would agree with that we want to set an example, and also the unique thing about having a municipal building improvement is the municipality owns that building forever. So the payoff, initial costs might be a lot upfront, but because it's amortized, or the payback goes on, forever, essentially, on a municipal building, it does make sense in the long run for, financial sense.
I'll just make a comment.
Urban?
I'll just make a comment, which is that we've got a facilities plan. Our facilities are in need of improvement, and we've already identified improvements that need to be made. So what I would recommend, Danielle, is that we kind of just incorporate language that says that this is going to be, where feasible, we're going to basically be looking at this as part of our facilities plan.
Yeah, that's what I just.
Something to that effect, right?
See how fast we make improvements. I've been here 15 years, and I think our carpet's been replaced once. So if we can incorporate it into the feasibility assessment and looking at that study, I think that helps versus just a blanket replacement. I think that will help in terms of implementation and how it's brought to council.
Yeah, I mean, it's an unfunded liability that we have to put it bluntly. Okay. So we have an unfunded liability on all of our buildings, and we are aware of that, and we need to find a funding mechanism for it. And this can be part of that facilities plan, and try to get this thing done. So make sense?
Thanks for that perspective.
Yeah.
On the carpet as well, Danielle.
Okay, then I think
Okay,
we
let's
can
keep
move
moving.
on to the next
Mhm.
one. And this is, yeah. Keep going because it's the
To
next,
E.
it's E. Yeah, so I think it's on the next page. There we go. So the comment here from us is that, so this E, develop a process by which renters can obtain energy usage and efficiency information for rental units. So this is something that the city can't do. It would have to be provided by PG&E and or MCE. I think this could be rewritten to be something like the city should encourage MCE or PG&E or work with them to develop a process or to provide this information, but it's just not, it's kind of out of the city's purview or what they have authority to do.
Well,
Yeah.
it can be helped by if tenants, because I've seen this in multifamily projects that we work on, where the developer can make a decision to meter everything separately. So and they often do that so that they can charge the tenants. But the goal here is to have some buy-in so that the owners aren't just, they don't care about energy efficiency, so they just pass on whatever costs there are to the tenant. I mean, that's the goal here is to have there be more of awareness and so that the tenant can actually become more aware, and then maybe their behavior and how they use energy then gets more considered.
Okay, so that's different than how I read that. So this is really about new construction and
Well, I'm not sure. I think I get my subcommittee partners, but I'm just looking at it as how, that it wouldn't necessarily just be PG&E, because it could have something to do with how people are being charged for their power by the owners of the building.
We didn't get into that, Greg, so I don't know that we have a firm recommendation. I hear where you're going with that, but that might be something that there's another point below that I'm going to bring up the same point, which is that there may be a couple things we want to add a little bit more to in the coming months of our task force being together. So can I just suggest, if there's language we want to suggest around that we can bring that in as new business?
Okay, well then maybe and
Yeah.
we can follow up on this, but we'll do it for, and we don't have a lot of multifamily projects, but hopefully we're going to start getting some as part of our housing element. And when those are developed, that we can make sure that it's done in a way that like I had mentioned before, so that it's
More aligned incentive stuff. Yeah.
okay.
And then can I just add, in terms of collaborating with energy providers, there's also the city, similar to some of the other education and outreach stuff, the city can promote. I just learned today about something called Home Intel, which PG&E provides as a free service. And I signed up as a renter. You get a free energy coach. You get a free assessment. It goes quite deep on energy use and cutting emissions and cost. So I think there's a role for the city to play in making the building owners and residents here aware of things like that.
Okay.
I think we can, that could be part of the D. And maybe it's not financing and loan programs, but it's energy use, it's everything,
Well,
or even this.
I would leave D as is, but I think it's just it's not so much C because it's its own thing, because it's not, an audit is more insight on usage patterns. So if you can scroll back down to E, I think E stands, but it's just promote it's less about, we're not going to develop the process, but we can promote ways that renters can obtain information on it.
Well, it's not just renters, right?
Yeah, any occupant, really, owners and occupants. So fair point.
Mhm.
Thank you. And can I jump ahead to say something on the next section, just in the interest of time while you're typing? So yesterday I was talking to somebody at San Francisco Department of Energy. They have moved beyond, in their new climate action plan, they've kind of moved beyond energy audits to something that they're calling strategic decarbonization assessments. They've got a tool now that's available for commercial building owners. I don't know if they're working on something for residential, I imagine so. But the point is, just as we expanded this section of the CAP to be kind of beyond just efficiency to broader decarbonization, even in the time since we wrote this as a recommendation, we're learning that there's kind of a bigger picture. Energy audits are typically limited towards efficiency, and we want to take a broader decarbonization view. So this is section EEC2, just as the section that Greg was talking about elaborating on. I would suggest that for EEC2, we come back to you with a little more considered thought about what we're recommending in the audit / assessment piece in next month, or in a meeting coming up shortly. If that would be okay, we can kind of just table that and move through the rest.
I think that's fine.
Okay, sorry, I'm
Okay.
tongue-tied.
All right. So then we'll just keep moving on.
I'll just make a
Yes.
comment before you say, require, right? Obviously, there's a lot of study behind that, because we don't know who's done this before, and kind of like, what's required. Again, this is, stick, right? So as opposed to, carrot. So again, requiring is just it's a big lift. And I'm not sure that there's a cost benefit here that's worthwhile for that big stick. So you got to choose your battles on some of these things. So just a kind of a general comment pertains to this, but other things as well. So.
And I think that's why you see the investigate as part of Luxor. I think this is something that is beneficial countywide.
Yep.
That momentum as a county-wide, or at least more than one jurisdiction, is helpful due to the different interest groups as part of this. So that's why I think you see Luxor using the word investigate.
Yeah, I think that's the right approach.
We have about 5 items on this document to go through before we're done. And we are at just about 7:40 right now.
Mhm.
And I believe we have some members of the public that were interested in hearing the transportation queue tonight. And I just want to check in on timing and our ability to complete all the items on the agenda for tonight.
Okay, I think we're close. This next one, we don't have to talk about. It says accept as edited. What do you think here? These are accept as is.
Right, and then we get to the electrify all landscape equipment, which I think we should discuss with transportation. That's where they were. And so they and I realize they're on-site fossil fuel generators, but we usually put the off-road equipment that's actually considered an off-road equipment in the transportation section. And I feel like we had shared some information in the transportation background material that should be kind of considered. So I think we should come back to those when we do the transportation. And then I think we should discuss the sustainable building materials, or ask if the task force wants to discuss these sustainable building materials.
And then the last item is carbon fund, which we discussed as a subcommittee. Well, Greg, you weren't there, but Al and I discussed taking that out. We did some investigation. We proposed just taking that out for now. It's too undeveloped to get into. So I'm taking that off the table.
Okay. So then we just have
Yeah,
so we really just have this one last one, which is kind of a 2-part, one in the design guidelines. And so if the task force would like to to kind of introduce this one?
I'll say a few words. You guys can chime in. I think from a high level, like, should we be using wood that's unsustainably harvested? No. So, like, let's just help support Greg in, approving projects that are being done more responsibly. That's kind of the bottom line, I think, at least for the first part.
And the goal here is that the use of those materials not considered, we're losing our carbon sinks in our rainforests and our temperate rainforests, et cetera. If old growth redwood and cedar and ipe from Amazon basin, and there's just so much that most people just don't know that there's alternatives. And when I brought this up recently, the applicant, including the architect and the applicant and the owner's part of the applicant, they were supportive of looking at some alternatives, and they came back and did some decking that was not ipe. So I thought, if I had a little bit more option in the climate action plan, that I know this isn't about emissions, but it's about our forests and
Well, it is about
our,
emissions. Yeah.
well, it is and it isn't. It's not like emissions in our town. It's more of a global impact that we're having as we purchase these things. And so it just seems like these are things that if I had some ability to have conditions of approval or something that I can reference when we're going through study sessions and design reviews, I'm challenging architects, at BAR, and we see a lot going on with other firms that are really pushing the decarbonization, and this is a big part of the spec that the architect provides is a big part of it. But we have a lot of architects that we see in the planning commission that are used to doing really expensive homes for and they just use these materials like it's candy, and I don't think they're really considering it because they don't know that what they're doing is impacting. So it just seems like if we have something in our climate action plan that helps us when we're reviewing buildings, then we're helping our climate action significantly. Even if it is 20 houses a year, it's 20 houses with just an ungodly amount of resources going into some of these homes.
I should also mention again, this is, upon adoption of the climate action plan and the by September 1st, 2022, we should take that out and identify the timing in the work plan. That would be the only recommendation from staff. And Urban, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I think, first of all, Greg, thank you for those comments. I think you're absolutely right. And I love your approach. The education is so key, right? People prescribe ipe and they don't realize what that entails, and they don't realize that there are good alternatives. And so there's just a fantastic educational component to this thing. So I think my recommendation would be to adopt the language that you've got in the sort of the bottom part of this page, where you've got, discourage the youth, provide education, promote, encourage, right? I think that's the right way to go about doing this thing. And I've seen that done so many times well in planning commission meetings where we're talking to applicants about what they can do and providing the education and the encouragement. And I think that's a great way of getting people to switch their materials from one to another. And I would recommend that would be the way to go about doing that. And then we should try to get our partners around the county to do exactly the same thing, which then actually does have a huge impact, because then you're talking about quite a lot of construction. And I think there's probably a good case to be made for education just countywide on this particular issue.
Yeah, no, good point. That really should be countywide, all the communities considering the same thing.
One option you might be able to do to simplify this rather than having an ordinance would be to make a mandatory, maybe we can bring this back and look at the green building checklist and just make the mandatory requirement. Right now, it's one of the selections that you can have, I believe, with
Yeah.
the green building. And what if you just made it a mandatory component? That might.
It is in a lot of, because I just had a conversation today with a staff member who was asking me some questions, and he said, you know, they want to go after this green building for this project, this custom home in Healdsburg, and he said there's a checkbox here for FSC certified materials. Should I check it? And I said, check it, you know, because we can maybe make a difference, and then the owner can evaluate the costs, and then if we have to compromise and come back and say, well, okay, how about FSC certified for cedar, redwood, other, you know, avoiding rainforest hardwoods, and then maybe framing and you know, because it goes into the plywood, it goes into a lot of those things, and some of those are harder because of the difficulty of getting lumber and materials right now. You can't make it impossible for people, but just considering it, like he didn't think about that checkbox, and he looked at our drawings that have been marked out and everything shows EPA, and I said, well, let's look at the alternatives, and I listed off like 3 or 4 things that we could reconsider than just having what, you know, used to be back in the really high end. It used to be people just threw out teak like it was just, you know, unbelievably available, and it's not. So it's now they don't, you know, Indonesia's gone with the teak and it's reclaimed, and now we're moving into to see how much EPA we can take out of South America. So anyway, enough on that.
If I may, I just like to offer, Daniel, can you scroll up to subsection A, revised permitting process? I would suggest that wording change. Planning approval can be construed as planning division approval, and I understand what this is saying is plan check approval. So I would suggest changing planning approval with plan check approval, or plan approval.
Yeah, plan approval makes sense. Well, it says as a condition of, condition of plan approval.
Yeah, it said planning, and that's a good
Yeah.
point, Patrick.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
because it's building permit.
It's building permit,
It's not planning, yeah.
right? All right, so if everyone's agreed, and I think we are, I think we're done with this matrix. Did anybody want to talk about anything, or did we go too fast to try to end this meeting on time? All right, I think we're good.
And then just as a course of procedure, so Danielle and Christine, you'll make the final edits and then circulate that back out to the group to have a final look.
Yes, we can do that. I mean, typically we would just do it and bring the entire plan back so that we can move, you know, and then look at it again, because we will be looking at the entire climate action plan, but we can make those edits and at least work with the subcommittee on
Okay, yeah, that sounds perfect.
finalizing them. Yeah, okay.
Good
Okay,
process.
great, super.
Yeah, I thought that was a good process. I knew that was going to take longer than half an hour.
I hate to
For
just
sure.
kind of like, you know, just kind of like going forward, just kind of a thought is, you know, so we've got these great subcommittees working on things. I mean, again, I think you ultimately want to come up with your high, you know, the things that you absolutely positively think will move the needle the most. And I just think that every subcommittee should be thinking about what that 1 or 2 thing is from each one of these groups. So when we are done, we therefore have a very clear work plan for the city and for the community going forward. That way we're very tight on what we're kind of recommending here. I think that would be really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks,
Okay,
everybody.
with that being said, that's exactly how we're going to try to move through transportation. So with that, Christine, if you want to take away.
Sure, I can do this really quickly. Can you start it on that slide? Because we're seeing the entire,
Sorry.
the whole thing right now. There we go. Okay, so we've already kind of talked about emissions, but this is just to remind you that transportation emissions make up more than 1/2 of the the community-wide emissions inventory as we calculated. And VMT on the graph on the right is showing VMT broken out by different, and I should say passenger vehicles, missing an A, by different vehicle types. So just to make the point that 95% of the VMT in Mill Valley is coming from passenger vehicles. Commercial vehicles are only 5%. Public transit is less than 1%. And yes, Susan, thank you. VMT, vehicle miles traveled, is what that acronym stands for. So, so I brought this in just to kind of make the point that really passenger vehicles is, you know, we're going to get more bang from our buck by focusing on passenger vehicles. And next slide. I showed you this slide in the beginning at our first meeting. It's just to reiterate that vehicle miles traveled, VMT, is down 14% since 2005. Why exactly? We're not, it could be, you know, because people are switching to alternative transportation. It could be just that they're driving less as the population ages, that may be a factor in why people are driving less. When we look at transportation emissions, they've gone down even more. They've gone down 31%. So that's a combination of both VMT going down, and also we have improvements in fuel efficiency of our vehicles. And we're using more alternatively fueled vehicles like electric vehicles. So those kind of combine to drive the total emissions decline. Next slide. This is a new slide that I haven't showed you before. This is looking at commute mode. So this is means of transportation to work as surveyed by the U.S. Census Bureau. This is these are going back to 2010. And kind of what's sobering about this graph is that it shows that really it hasn't changed over time. It kind of fluctuates, but all of these are really within the margin of error. It's pretty, because it's the way the survey's done, there's pretty large margin of errors. And so really, you know, you look at the biking and the walking, and, you know, for the last 10 years, we really haven't been able to make any significant changes in any of these transportation modes. Next slide. Can I have the next slide? Okay, there we go. So this is really meant, this presentation is just meant to kind of be an introduction to the background material that we've circulated to you. And if you haven't had a chance to read through it yet, you'll note that a lot of it is on ZEVs. And the focus, part of the reason why there's so much focus on ZEVs is that when we do the calculations, you know, so much of the GHG emissions reductions really can come from zero emission vehicles, and primarily electric vehicles. And so this is just some data that shows you how the ZEV growth rates have been growing. They've been averaging about 28% annual growth rate since over the last 4 years. And I'm seeing Susan's note here. Yeah, ZEVs are zero emission vehicles. They include full battery electric vehicles. They also include plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. So those can have a small gas engine as well as a plug-in for electricity. And they also include fuel cell vehicles, of which there's very few in Marin County and in Mill Valley. And so if we increase our ZEVs at the 25% annually, we would actually get to 25% of all passenger vehicles registered in Marin by 2030. And that's just kind of if we continue on this path that we're on. Of course, it's harder as you go along to you know, maintain that kind of growth rate, but that is how we could, one pathway to get to 25%. At this time, 6.8%, almost 7% of all registered vehicles in Mill Valley in 2020 were zero emission vehicles. And that's a little bit behind Belvedere and Ross and Tiburon, but higher than most other communities in Marin. And next slide. Okay, there we go. So again, in the packet, in background information, we do have a discussion of all of the legislation and that's out there. I'm just highlighting a couple of things here. One is probably this executive order, you've probably heard of it. 100% of in-state sales of new passenger cars and light duty trucks should be ZEVs by 2035. The air district, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, has a goal to have 1.5 million ZEVs on the road by 2030. So since it's a goal and it's in their climate action plan, they are going to be putting funding and programs in order to try to make this happen. 1.5 million ZEVs is equivalent to 27% of the on-road population of vehicles in 2020. So the question here that we want the task force to kind of, think about is, what is a reasonable and achievable goal for Mill Valley for a percent of the passenger vehicle fleet that will be ZEVs by 2030? And I've identified here the different goals that the other jurisdictions have. They're kind of range from 25% to the county has 45%, and Fairfax, of course, is at 100%. When you just simply look at replacement, because it takes a vehicle is on the road for 8 years, so it's really virtually impossible to get to 100% for Fairfax by 2030, but that is their goal. So the question we'll be exploring at the next meeting is really, what should Mill Valley's goal be for their target for 2030? And the next slide, so you'll see that there are other, we have provide a lot of information on these other transportation measures. I don't think I'm going to go into them really, just for the sake of our time right now, but please review all of that background information, and we can talk more about it at the meeting next month. So I think Danielle wanted to say a few things here.
What I'm doing, I'm going to turn it over to the subcommittee so they can just, the transportation subcommittee, so they can talk about their initial thoughts on where they will focus. We will open it up to public comment, and then we can close with just task force thoughts on the direction that the subcommittee is going.
All right.
Okay, thank you, Danielle. Paul Moe here, and thank you, Karen Jaber, and Fiona Matley, and Al Grummet for the subcommittee input for the transportation. Right now, we're focusing on policy, how we want to go ahead and target the areas that we feel are going to be the most productive to lower the carbon. Obviously, the cars are the biggest target and the easiest one, and there's lots of different ways to go about that. We realize that Mill Valley has a lot of electric vehicles, with a lot more coming. Although some of the biggest employers, like the Redwoods, the grocery stores, and the schools, and large apartments, need to have the facility to charge these. So we're looking at charging stations, putting in them so it's convenient and economical for not only the residents, but the people who are going to be commuting. We feel that's a large area that we can make an input on and improve on. We want to look at improving our transportation network through facilitating easier movement through the city. There's new technology that can coordinate traffic lights. So when school gets out, in real time, it understands that there's going to be this bigger flow coming in. So we're looking at recommending things like that. Changing existing habits. That's a big one. We have multiple trips to and from homes that seem excessive and hard to believe, but it's out there. And if we can change some habits there, we can lower the carbon footprint there. Recommending an education process to help understand how we can get people out of cars. Also, enhancing and maintaining and enhancing our right-of-ways so that if you're out of a car, you're on a bike or walking, it's just easier to get around Mill Valley. And Al has been very helpful in digging down and finding specifics on this. Right now we're in the policy phase, but we are expecting to dig down and get very specific about things that we can recommend that will really help. So that's what I have. Al, would you like to add something?
I think just the stuff on the slides, if everyone can see that, reducing vehicle miles traveled through mode shift. And this is really about having bicycle networks that don't have major breaks in them along key corridors. And then looking at housing policy and looking at how we can encourage multifamily housing and greater housing density so that lots of commuting that's happening from out of town can be replaced by teachers, firefighters, police living here and working here, and making sure that people who do live locally have places to store and park their bicycles, and EV infrastructure for electric vehicles, and then just initiatives to promote adoption of electric vehicles. So lots to come. Thanks everyone for your time today.
So I had, I know I'm maybe a bit out of line. I just wanted to really quickly say two ideas that popped up that I've been thinking about for how we deal with multifamily housing and other, other mixed use. Is that, has anyone considered maybe like a zip car, trying to get zip car into town, and maybe the zip cars happen to be electric, and at the, the city parking lot at 411, could there be the possibility of somebody being able to go with car sharing, or even bike shares, where maybe something downtown by the depot, you're able to either an e-bike or another bike is part of, not having to have a car necessarily. And
I think what we want to do is, yes, your point.
those
is
are just
well
two things
taken.
I just wanted to throw out there.
I think we'll be looking at all the actions for the next meeting, and that will include the recommended modifications by the subcommittee. So that will be looked at.
No, I understand. I just thought before the subcommittee meets, if there's two ideas that might be considered while they're meeting before the next time, and maybe that was something that they could think about. That's all.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. We're going to take all that input in, and we're going to eventually incorporate it into our recommendations.
Okay, so before we go to the committee, the task force, I'd like to get public comment, and then we can close with task force discussion. So I see one raised hand. Warren.
Yep.
I have unmuted you if you'd like to, you have 3 minutes. If you'd like to give us your thoughts, that would be great.
Great. Yep. This is Warren Wells, Policy and Planning Director for the Marin County Bicycle Coalition. I just want to thank everybody for all their hard work on this and look forward to, seeing what the subcommittee comes back on. Just really wanted to, I do understand that, the MISR work is in some ways constrained by what the modeling, says, but I do, in reading the draft so far, it is pretty clear that, a pretty large share of the time and attention is going here toward EVs. There's kind of a it feels like a bit of a throwaway line about, improving bike and pedestrian network on page 4, but we spend a lot of time on EVs, which again are really totally necessary and 100% something we should be working on. I did, in prepping for this meeting, was reviewing the CAPCOA handbook and looking at other tools that can be used to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, a number of which I feel like don't find their way into here, and I would encourage the subcommittee to look into. So these could include, looking at vehicle parking. The document currently says that that's a key point of discussion in the community, but doesn't go so far as recommending that parking supply or minimum parking requirements be reduced, when there is really good evidence that increased parking supply is positively correlated with car ownership, and higher rates of parking correlate to more driving and less walking and biking. And the that handbook does show that they're pretty large greenhouse gas emission reductions for some of these parking supply policies. Same thing goes with end of trip bicycle parking. That's something that I mean, again, I know the bicycle pedestrian master plan touches on, but would be good to see kind of fleshed out here. There really is very little secure, very little bike parking at all, much less secure bike parking really anywhere in Mill Valley. And it's certainly not at present time required as for any off-street for any multifamily development. Currently, Mill Valley requires 2 auto parking spaces for every multifamily unit and no bicycle parking, which is something I think we could see changing going forward with the additional multifamily that we'll be having to be built in the town. I think, let's see, was that all I wanted to note? Yeah, and then this is less of a climate issue, but automobiles have other externalities, noise, they take up a lot of space. In the past 10 years, I think in 2010, 2 people died in car crashes in the county of Marin, and last year it was 21, so almost 10 times as many. And so, if we have choices for how we can decarbonize, whether it's all EVs or reduce driving and more biking and walking, the question is which one should we prefer? Oh, sorry, one more thing if I have a second. I did have a question for Ms. O'Rourke. I see that the report by CARB, the California Art Resources Board, said that the state needs to reduce VMT by 25% by 2030 to hit the greenhouse gas emission targets. And I was wondering, is Mill Valley an exception to that in that regard, or is that number outdated? Because it seems, all right, I'll end there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, let's see here. I do not see any other hands raised. So with that, I'll turn it over to Christine.
Task force or Christine?
I'm sorry, did you just call for me? To answer the question, I think, the state might have the state goal could be 25% reduction. There are regional goals, and then so that's incorporated into the regional transportation plan. And I don't know, I think the requirement is, I'm looking in my notes here, and a 19% reduction in GHG emissions. And so that's not really translated to VMT. There are requirements that VMT has to be reduced 15% by new development. That's kind of a secret requirement. So, and there are bicycle requirements, in the green building code and in the building code. So there are bicycle parking requirements for all new development, multifamily, and I think that was mentioned, and I think that's something, we didn't provide that information, but I can provide that information to the transportation subcommittee as well. So you can at least see what's required and then make that decision if you want to, make a recommendation to go above and beyond the requirements.
Okay, so with that, if we have any questions, or if we want to have any discussion from the task force, and we can close the meeting.
Urban's got his hand raised.
Oh, I just want to make 2 comments. So just for the task force to consider. So the first one is on EV charging. So I've seen the statistics so many times now, the 700 public charging stations. And as we all know, cars used to go, the Leaf, when it came out, went like 40 miles, right? And they need to be charged, right? So those charging stations were vital. But now EVs go 300 miles. And I would just kind of think really carefully about the EV charging network in public space argument, because it's been kind of part of the dialogue all along. I'm just not convinced that it's 100% accurate still, because the world has changed, right? These EVs just go much, much farther than they used to. And there's already an incredible network of these charging stations out there. 700 in a county which has got 200,000 people is a crazy number. It's like a charging station for every 50 households or something like that. It's very high. It must be the highest in the nation. So I just wanted you to maybe think about that and not kind of like fall for the knee-jerk reaction. It might be that we do need more, but I would just kind of like think about it a little bit carefully before going for that. Secondly, I do think like this behavioral change is really very, very critical. And how do you get people to kind of make this changeover? And I, not to single anybody out, but Fiona, I am really interested in what you have to say about this, because the table in the report where, you know, the number of kids going to school by car at 50% is just, it just stuns me every time I see that in a town which is not very big geographically. And some of these schools, like Old Mill, is a neighborhood school. So that always stuns me, and how we move the needle on that, because just as a benchmark in the 1970s, it was 90%, and we've fallen to 50%. And so getting that back has got so many great benefits for our community. It's not even worth going into, but you know, greenhouse gas is one of them, not to mention just like traffic reduction. So it's really a very key. And I'm just really interested in what you guys come up with in terms of how you move that. And then the last point I wanted to just make is on, is it just like on a top down kind of like, how do you come up with a target for how many EVs you think you can get? Just one way to think about, you know, we have roughly 2/3 of our housing stock is single family residents. Those are probably the easiest one to move over to an EV because they have the potential to park and charge and so forth. So it's not hard to believe that that group would move first. It's a little bit harder for multi-unit dwellers. So just to be aware, right? So roughly 2/3 of our housing stock, or 2/3 of our population, live in single family residence. And if you think about the replacement cycle for a car being 8 years, you know, by 2030, try to move every 2-car households to one EV and one IC is probably not a really, probably a good target. And if you do that, the rough math is you get to about, you know, roughly 33%, which was above many of the other communities. It was below Fairfax, which was at 100%, but otherwise it was above everybody else. So that might be one way that you just kind of like think through the math on where you think you might be able to get to. That's what I thought, at least. That was it.
Got that. Thank you, Urban. With regard to the charging stations, we have given that a lot of thought. And what we're seeing is the commuters coming in, a lot of them live in apartments, don't have any facility to charge any electric vehicle. And that if they had charging abilities at their place of employment in Mill Valley, that would encourage them. And then with Greg's idea of car sharing, focusing in on the workers in the city that could car share and charge the vehicle, we realize that's an area that specific to Mill Valley that could help. And then Fiona is working with the schools to incentivize some of the drivers to go ahead and get out of the vehicles and walk, and how we do that, how we incentivize that, and give them some sort of motivation, prizes, an A grade and something. We're working on that. We see that as a big deal.
Yeah, so in our last meeting, we kind of talked about a couple different ideas of ways to reduce traffic from all the schools, especially the high school and the very local elementary schools with who almost all the students have an option to walk. So we were talking about incentivizing with things like community service hours and stuff like that to kind of help get people walking and biking, and we're going to continue to work on those topics.
Sounds great.
So in the interest of time, I want to make sure that we don't have any final questions from the task force or guidance or comments with respect to directionally where the transportation subcommittee is headed. All really great suggestions so far. Okay, I don't see any raised hands. Okay.
So with that,
Danielle, yeah.
Yeah, I will follow up on meeting dates for the January, February meeting. And we will be coordinating with the task force and we both task force to finalize the old business and work towards the new business. Christine and I will also talk about speakers and coordinate with that with the transportation committee as well. So please read that background section on transportation as well as Larkspur's transportation section. What will happen is we will be the transportation committee subcommittee will provide a red line version of the Larkspur cap as a way of similarly of what we did tonight of seeing modifications to the document based on their work. So that's how we're going to do the next meeting. And I want to thank you all and wish you all a happy holiday. And we will be seeing you in 2022. Please feel free to email me if you have any questions.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you,
Happy
Danielle.
holidays, meeting
Yeah, great
adjourned.
meeting. Thank you, everybody. Have a great holiday. See you next year.
All right.
Thank you,
Thank you.
task
Happy
force,
holidays.
Subcommittees for all your extra work. I appreciate it.
Yep.
Same
Thanks for
here.
your support. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.